Welcome back, my friends, to AA Recovery Interviews. I'm your host, Howard L., and I'm an alcoholic, sober since January 1st, 1988, one day at a time. I'm grateful you've joined us. AA Recovery Interviews is the podcast where Alcoholics Anonymous members from around the world share their extraordinary stories of experience, strength, and hope. I invite you to scroll through my catalog of more than 130 awesome interviews and follow us on any podcast app or at the website aarecoveryinterviews.com. Every episode is unique, inspiring, engaging, and meaningful. Each story is a powerful testimony of the recovery available to all in AA. Today's episode is an encore presentation of my interview with Tom D., originally released in January 2021. On my show today is Tom D., a man with an incredible story, whose life was turned inside out and upside down by alcoholism, drug addiction, and crime. From a difficult childhood, he emerged into a troubled adolescence, drinking at 14, shoplifting, and getting kicked out of high school. Hanging with the older boys, his drinking increased beyond sociable, and his drugs got harder, culminating in a ruinous heroin addiction. His 20s and his early 30s saw him in and out of county jails and state prison, until his third felony conviction for armed robbery at age 36 finally resulted in a life sentence at a maximum security prison. With alcohol and various drugs widely available from other inmates, his life behind bars provided little chance of sobriety or parole. Amidst the bleak realization that he'd spend the rest of his life in prison, there came a small spark of hope ignited by memories of the early AA meetings Tom had attended during his many stints in the county jails. Though he hadn't succeeded with the program in the past, he started going to AA meetings in prison, brought there by a small group of dedicated members of the outside AA community. He found his sponsor inside, who guided him in working the 12 steps. Slowly, he began to turn his thinking and spiritual awareness around. Ultimately, he found that service to other inmates from a genuinely humble frame of mind gave his life newfound meaning and purpose. But that's just part of his story. You'll hear the rest in a moment. Suffice it to say that Tom's AA program, forged in prison, was burnished in the years since he was released. He has become a cherished member of the AA community and a vital part of the recovery scene. He's a fine and trusted friend to many, and one of my favorite people in the fellowship. So, clear your schedule for the next hour or so and enjoy this remarkable interview with my AA brother, Tom D.
My name's Tom, and I'm an alcoholic.
Hi, Tom. I'm so glad you're here today. And first of all, I want to congratulate you on an upcoming birthday. That's the 6th, is it, of January?
That's correct.
And it's 28 years. Wow.
Right.
That's astounding. So did you ever think you'd live this long?
And not this long or not this long sober. Both.
Well, you know, you're one of my favorite people in the program, and I see you on a regular basis. And before the pandemic, of course, we would see each other in meetings all the time. And since the pandemic, we've been in Zoom meetings together. And when you're going to meetings with people, you get to hear little bits and pieces about their lives, and you have to fill everything else in. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to have you on the podcast, so that you can relate what it was like, what happened, but just as importantly, what it's like now and it has been since you got sober. Just by the way of a little bit of a historical perspective, can you start us out on like where you grew up and what life was like, a brief synopsis of when you started drinking?
Sure, and thank you. So I grew up in Westview, Bel Air, Bel Air for the most part.
Yeah.
My whole family drank, and they drank normally, so I saw everybody, grandparents, aunts, uncles, people that visited, drinking what I would call cordially, backyard barbecues when we went fishing or hunting and stuff like that, or like Thanksgiving, Christmas, wine. All kids got wine at the table, just as well. We had a little glass of wine, just as other people, as adults, got a larger glass.
So, did you notice anybody getting drunk? Were there any people who got tipsy that you noticed?
I had one uncle that ended up in Alcoholics Anonymous, and I remember what they told me, and I was probably like 5 years old. They told me that Uncle Carol was sick. And he was falling down and throwing up. And so I just, and at that time, my definition of sick was he fit what he was doing.
Yeah. Yeah.
And no one, I never could tell the difference in anybody else. They seem to have a lot of fun when we're barbecuing.
Yeah.
but I never noticed anybody, they didn't start talking poorly to each other, or did they start acting in a way that seemed uncivil. And I can remember getting sips. I kind of worked the course. I would go around, everybody had those little stands that stuck in the ground back then, and they have a mixed drink in it, and they usually had fruit in them, and they would let me get the fruit, so I could get the slice of orange or the maraschino cherry out. But in doing that, I always got a sip, and it was kind of scolded, but no one ever made it seem like it was a bad deal. And you get about 10 sips of a mixed drink.
And you're a little kid.
Right. Pretty soon you start, swinging on the swings becomes more fun and all that stuff, right?
Yeah. That's tough when you're a little kid. So the environment in which you grew up, kind of a middle-class environment?
Right. Yeah. So definitely. It was, my father was killed in a car accident when I was 6, and my mother raised us for the rest of our, alive until we were adults and left home. My mother raised us by herself. So she worked at the VA hospital. She went back to where both of my parents were college educated. So after my dad got killed, she went back to work and took care of the 4 of us.
Wow. So 4, where are you in the line of siblings?
I was the oldest.
You were the oldest.
I'm still the oldest.
Still the oldest, yeah. Lots of people get to alcohol or drug use as a way to escape from or treat whatever ills they suffered in their family of origin. What was that like for you in your family of origin? Was it peaceful? Was it chaotic? How did that look? 2 things are true for me, because now I do believe it's a family disease. So that I had a genetic predisposition for alcoholism, and I didn't know that then. But I can remember before my dad died, before anything that seemed what I would have perceived as really traumatic had ever occurred, I can remember wanting to drink because my dad and my granddad were drinking beer. I wanted to have a beer because they were having a beer. And I was like 5 or something then. And my dad told me I could have a beer if I could take one of those old real thick beer cans and crunch it with my hand in the middle, and then take the 2 ends and fold it over. And he did it and showed me what to do. And I went straight to the kitchen and got one out of the trash can and kneeled on the can, and then took all my weight, my 5-year-old weight, and folded the can over and took it in and presented it to him. And said there, and he looked at it. He pitched it in the trash, drained the beer he was drinking, and told me to show him again. So he knew that that I had crunched that can with my hand. Oh man, what a rite of passage that was. So did you ever get the beer after that?
That I felt like almost gave me permission to drink. It was just a matter of when. And of course, we're about the same age, so there was a point in time when the cans got really easier to smash.
I'll bet.
But and it wasn't until like I got sober this time that I actually tied in the fact that my dad's death when I was 6 years old was an event that I just tried not to feel that pain.
Yeah, I get that.
So I think that may have been what you were aiming towards.
Yeah, I was aiming towards what your first experience was, but when it comes to the first experience of actually drinking based on your own decision to take a drink, when did that start?
So we were probably 12, 10. There was just guys trying to be guys. We were not old enough to get out and do anything on our own, and we started. We would do odd jobs, and sometimes people would think, well, they could pay us with beer, and it was a cheaper way to pay us, and we would take beer. Of course, it didn't take much, and then we drank too fast, and we drank hot beer, and we didn't know that it made a difference and all that stuff. So, and we were probably about 12. And then we started sneaking in people's garages because they stored alcohol in the garages. So we would go in there and purloin something from someone else. Was a fifth of whiskey or whatever it might be, beer.
Did that initiated your drinking plus other behaviors?
Yes. Yeah, obviously I was stealing one, like anything my mother directed me to do. And then we started drinking, and we was usually weekends. And I can remember we stole a fifth of whiskey because my mother had a maid that came in, and she's not really a part of our family, although she did not live with us, but she took care of us when we came home from school. She got dinner cooked and had the house clean. I went in and took a fifth of whiskey and poured it into another container and left a little bit in the bottom of the bottle, and then broke the bottle on the floor and put a bunch of water with it. And so there would be enough volume of water. And then I went, oh my God, and she came in and I said, oh, Mom's going to kill me. And our maid's name was Vera. And Vera says, don't worry about it, baby. I'll tell her I did it so you don't get in trouble. And I thought, thank you. We went right out that night and
oh man,
some guy that was old enough to drive drove us around, and we got drunk riding around in Bel Air.
Wow. And you were how old?
Oh, probably 14 then.
14. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So you got to learn about deception as a way to get alcohol.
Right.
What was it like when you drank? Were you sick? Did you get a hangover? What was the feeling when you were that age and getting drunk?
Initially, I started like sneaking beer once I realized that the beer was always available somewhere in somebody's garage. I started sneaking a few beers and not drinking too much. I realized that I could drink like 2 or 3 beers and just it changed the way I felt. And I would be up late at night in the summer, about the same age, 13 something. I was old enough not that my mother didn't make me go to bed when it wasn't school time.
Sure.
But everybody else had to go to bed, so I was up by myself, and TV had to go off like at midnight anyway. So I'd be up just watching something on TV, like Johnny Carson or something. And then when we stole the whiskey, that was the first time we drank. We didn't know that like the difference in alcohol content or anything. We didn't know how much stronger whiskey was than beer. So we had no idea. We drank that. There was 3 of us, and we drank a fifth of whiskey. We were hammered. we couldn't stand up. We tried to get back in the house, holding on to each other, we could hold each other up and kept falling down. We got busted, couldn't get in the house. I mean, I walked in the house trying to walk a straight line. I'm just trying to get to my bedroom, and I just veered off like one of those jets or planes that's been shot. It just went, and crashed over into the kitchen. My mother said, "What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Nothing." She says, "Have you been drinking?" Oh my God.
And what'd you tell her?
I said, "Yeah." And then she said, "Where'd you get it?" And I told her that we tricked the maid and stole it from her. You have a tendency to confess when you're drunk.
Yeah. What were the consequences of that for you?
I had to mow the lawn on Saturday mornings, and it was a Friday evening that we did that. And she got me up at the crack of dawn and told me how embarrassed she was and how this isn't the way she raised me, and get out there, you're going to go mow the yard. And I remember mowing the yard, puking. I'd push the lawnmower for 4 or 5 feet, and then I'd stop and hurl, just retch. And it was miserable, but of course it didn't make me not want to drink.
Not a bad trade. Getting drunk for mowing the lawn, even though you got pretty sick. So you were 14 when that's going on, and were you hanging with a particular group, let's say in high school and beyond, that encouraged or supported or bolstered your drinking?
It seemed as if everybody I knew. So we were a group of people, and we skateboarded. We were surfing, and we would do just the dumbest stuff, just for entertainment. We weren't going anywhere particularly. We would just be somewhere like at the park or something like that, and then we'd start beating on each other.
Yeah. When did drugs enter into the picture for you?
At about that time. There was there wasn't it was hard to differentiate. The one thing, people started having marijuana was available first, and then it was anything else, and then anything else became everything else without going deeply into it in an AA talk. The idea that it eventually became everything that was around. Eventually, I tried, and some of those things took me over.
Yeah, like, what's your favorite drug? What do you got?
Exactly, right. Pilfer every parent's medicine chest. If we looked at something that would either help them reduce their weight, or it was something that helped them sleep at night or treat anxiety, we'd read the directions on the bottom and we say, oh, we want some of those.
Did you sense that you were starting to have a problem with it, or did you just go along and it didn't affect you too much?
I don't think I saw it as a problem. I can remember my once it became evident to my mother that, I remember they took me to some sort of a group counseling thing. It was a number of years before I ever even heard about a 12-step meeting. I mean, it was literally till I got sober the first time when I was about 21. But I went to some counseling groups where they talked, like the Texas Research of Institute of Mental Sciences had a group where we went there and talked, and everybody went and got high afterwards. But we had we'd all have a kind of conversation. It's similar to what AA is, except for that nobody was like committed to staying sober. They were just committed to coming in, once a week and talking.
At what point during your drinking and drug use did you start to notice that that it was a problem, or what was the trajectory of your life like between the social drinking in high school and the pilfering of people's medicine cabinets till you got to the point where it was becoming a problem?
I suppose when I started thinking that it would be easier to, people would say, you can do this and make more money. So it became like a money thing. So we would sell drugs or do things like that, or take something that didn't belong to us and everything that looked like, somebody's not keeping a close eye on their things, particularly businesses and stuff like that, were initially stuff that we thought, well, taking advantage of all the regular people, and we thought stuff as regular people, so we would take advantage of them. And it could be as simple as sneaking into the movies, which was to save a few bucks like that, shoplifting at the local drugstore for nuisance kind of stuff, inconsequential, smaller things. Then it kind of just progressed, got worse and worse as that went along. Children learn from somebody a little older. So there's almost always somebody older a year or two that's giving you the good information.
Oh,
right?
Yeah.
Right. Whether it's about alcohol or whatever else you might do, girls or anything.
Sure. So somebody you want to emulate, somebody you look up to, so whatever they're doing, you do. Was the drinking and drug use, did that soften up your morals, or was the influence of drugs and alcohol in any way, in your mind, responsible for the other behavior, the stealing and that kind of thing?
I would say so. To me, yes. Because, one, it lowered my inhibition. So I always felt like I was a small guy.
Yeah.
And I felt like I was kind of like not able to take care of myself by myself. So, and I learned, when I was little, I had a rifle, so I already had gone hunting with my grandfather and my dad and everything before.
Yeah.
I was able to hold a rifle up and hold it out straight. So, and I think every boy in our family had a pocket knife, and we learned how to sharpen our pocket knife, and it was a tool, so they cut string with or whittle on a piece of wood or something like that. But I carried one, and then as time went on, I kept getting a bigger one, and then I would, and if you're under the influence of alcohol or other things, and sometimes the idea that, do you think you can pick on me because I'm skinny or small or whatever it is, and I'll pull this out and prove to you otherwise, which led to some incidents where I ended up cutting a couple of people just to kind of get them get away, you know, and
Yeah.
pulled a knife on my mother had one boyfriend in her entire post my father's death life.
Right.
And he was around for a few years, and he got after me one day, chasing me when I was about 10 years old, and had me hemmed up in a corner. One of my other younger brothers, came and pitched me my pocket knife, and I remember opening it just kind of like a little bitty kid waving something in front of him. He could have, you know, taken me down and taken away from me, but he slowed down and stopped. And I remember thinking, I remember that, you know, you learn lessons the way you learn lessons. I remember that he stopped and backed up. And I remember that knife is why he stopped.
Wow.
And why he didn't whip my ass. And so that's just like I put that in a toolkit.
Yeah, that was the lesson that made it okay later on to do that kind of stuff.
Right.
Could you give me an idea what things were like from the time you got out of high school until the next major milestone in your life?
So we were coming to the attention of the officials in high school. So I never completed high school. They asked me to, in Bel Air High School, they asked me to move on down the road. And that was directly related to, you know, some of it was truancy. Some of it was just being a rebel, not wanting to put my shirt tail in and stuff like that. They were not catching us under the influence, although we were sitting out in the car, smoking marijuana and drinking and stuff before we went to school. So they moved me out of there, and then I tried to go to Lamar, and I had to wait a few months, get an extreme haircut, and we went in there as the best I could look, like I was going to church or something. And the guy said, "We really don't want your kind here." I thought, okay, this is a losing operation. So I didn't. And at that point, I was, you know, off and running. You know, I was big enough then at 15, going on 16. You know, that I just thought I was, you know, I'm always been tall, so I was like 6'5" then, and you know, and I just thought I was grown, you know, and I started, you know, running around with guys that were a little older than me that were already, you know, out of their family homes. I wasn't not there yet. Yeah. And I started running with an older group of people that did a lot of things, and I just, you know, those guys were sort of, I don't want to say heroes to me, but they were role models for sure.
Sure.
They were guys that had fast cars, and they were selling drugs, and, you know, and I would see them hurt people, but I thought, well, then people were scared of them. And I thought, okay, that works, you know, and so there you learn a lot of lessons that aren't particularly beneficial to being a productive human being, trying to, you know.
In emulating them or looking up to them, did you start to engage in that behavior yourself, hurting people and making them scared of you and that kind of thing?
Right. That's true. I did. It didn't feel like it really until I feel like that whatever I was doing, that once I got addicted, then I became, you know, one was I was addicted, you know, I mean, and I would switch, like I would stop using heroin, and then I would be back to drinking, you know, and I always drank with it. So whether I was doing whatever I did, alcohol and then marijuana were kind of a backstop. They were always kind of a piece of the puzzle. But if I would go into withdrawal, say it's going too bad, I would increase my drinking. So I would have like a fifth, and I would tell myself that like tequila was like a drug. So that's what I told myself. So I didn't feel like, I didn't feel very favorably towards people that were alcoholic, but I didn't have a problem with heroin addicts. You know, so it's curious, but you know, and so I would convince myself that tequila was really like a drug. It wasn't like I was drinking alcohol, and I'd have a fifth of it. I'd sometimes have to wake up in the middle of the night and get a couple of sips to get sleep through the night. You know?
Isn't that interesting? You know, a lot of times when we're talking about drug usage, because I was co-addicted as well, but we always, in linking it with alcohol, say, I use drugs alcoholically. And what you're talking about is using alcohol...
like a drug.
Like a drug. So where did that heroin use kick in, and where did that take you?
Well, it's a monster. You know, there's no upside to it. And I had... some of the older guys, I'd learned, I mean, I was deathly afraid of needles when I was a kid. But I became, you know, once you start doing it and you say that's a faster way to get whatever you're trying to do done, I became an IV drug user. And that, and I stayed away from heroin for a couple of years doing stimulants and stuff like that because I thought, well, enjoy life, stay awake. And then, everything turns against you, as they say. The reason we do drugs and alcohol is because they feel good initially. Right. They work. Alcohol worked, or I would never drank it again. And the same is true for all the other poisons. And they have an initial effect that's that works, and you go, wow, that's and then it turns against you. Even the most benign, in my case, marijuana became one of those things. It was the last thing that once I quit using heroin and alcohol, I hadn't even considered stopping weed necessarily because I just didn't think it just seemed innocuous, to me. And then I remember a counselor in the program I was in asked me, somebody went up there and they said, hey, those guys are smoking weed in the living quarters. And he came and said, are you smoking weed and over there? And I said, that's a personal question. He said, not a personal question, Tom. It's a yes or no question. Are you smoking weed over there? And I said, yeah, but who told on me? And he said, well, you snitched on yourself by, what you're doing in front of other people. And then he asked me that at that time, I had not ever really considered, like it was that kind of like you would think it would be like a real aha moment. You would know all that stuff. I mean, because I had been sober before at that time, the last time when I got sober in 93. But I was just not looking at it that way. I was thinking, heroin and alcohol are kicking my ass. Cocaine, I know, will kick my ass. Methamphetamine will kick my ass. But weed, I just saw it was not that bad of a deal,
So you turned to marijuana to kick the drugs and alcohol at the time?
Well, I was using it the last thing because it was just around. I mean, I didn't go hunting for it particularly at that time. It was just happened to be somebody had some, and so it was, I'd say okay, because I didn't have a defense against saying okay to that. And I think it had always been a piece of the puzzle, but it hadn't been one of those things that I would go to extreme lengths necessarily. There's a whole lot of stuff that you recognize later because THC's the way it's stored in your system, its half-life doesn't allow for you to really experience if you're like really consume a lot of THC and then you don't consume any. You don't really notice the effects of the decline of the THC because it dissipates at such a slow rate. So it's and I could look back in time and see when there'd be you're old enough there used to be droughts in the summer. And then when there would be a week or two where you couldn't get any. By the time a week or two had gone by, you were willing to go to any bad part of town and go get let somebody sell you something that wasn't even a close facsimile, but just because you wanted some. Whereas at day 1 or 2 or 3, that craving wasn't that strong. It took a while for the THC to dissipate completely from a person that smoked on a regular basis. I never knew that though back then.
Can you give me kind of a timeline between when all this was happening and whenever the disease and or consequences finally caught up with you?
Sure. I ended up I'd robbed a drug connection and got kidnapped by them. They picked me up going to go rob somebody else. I was just doing a real kind of base street kind of crime. And
how old were you at that time? How old were you when that happened?
21. Well, actually, I was probably 20. So these guys scooped me up, held me for hostage. And by that time, my mama, my grandmama, and all them they would not come put any more money on the table for me. And so I was out, and they were holding me in an apartment complex in Southeast Houston, and they beat me up some and were threatening to shoot me and all this stuff. And I was calling around trying to find somebody that would, pay the money that was owed, a few $100 that I'd cost those guys. And this guy that I went to high school with, that was a starting quarterback on our high school football team, valedictorian, most popular guy, but he was also a guy that drank and used, and I ran around with him regularly on a daily basis since we were in 5th or 6th grade. And he came and bailed me out, but he said, don't ever call me again. And he took me to Ben Taub's emergency room. and dropped me off that night. And they kept me there and ended up giving me something that was kind of like a psychiatric medication or something that made me feel real goofy. But I was still in withdrawal from drugs, from opiates. And I went back to the place I was living with a couple of scuzzy guys, and I realized something had to happen. So I called my grandmother, and my grandmother, who wouldn't come up for the money, didn't mind, trying to. And I told her, I got to do something, or I don't know what to do. And she said, well, they have these meetings at the church. And I'm going, and I thought, oh man, the church. I thought they were trying to, convert me back to, going to church, and I didn't want to do that. But I thought, well, I didn't have any solution other than that. So I went, and I had a friend of mine who, drove that actually, she came and got her mama's car and came and picked me up and took me to my grandmama's house. When they carried me over there, and two people from the church came. It was a priest and a guy that's recovering alcoholic and addict. And they came in, and the guy that was a member of the program came in and talked to me, and the preacher went in there and talked to my grandmother. And I, as they say, the therapeutic value of one alcoholic working with another, and what he did in the hour or so that we spent together, he convinced me that he understood what I was going through, and I had never sat down with him, and that there was a solution. Right? So I didn't really believe that. Because I wasn't hearing about it anywhere. And he told me, if you're interested, we have a meeting at the church tonight. And so I came. I went. I got sober and stayed sober for about a year and a half, and I relapsed through a series of just getting overwhelmed with being an adult.
Yeah.
I say that in hindsight. At the time, if I would have known it, if somebody says, well, you're fixing to get married to this woman, you're going to do it in the church, you're holding down a job, you're paying your bills and everything,
right? And
people look at you as being a responsible member of this sober community. That pressure was a real but unacknowledged factor.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was just going to interject that now this is happening in the early 70s.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Exactly.
So what was your program like for that year and a half?
I went to a meeting every day. So a 12-step recovery meeting. I was working at a treatment facility with people that were younger than me, but I always went to meetings with people that were, I went to also to meetings where older people went to some, like Alder Street men's group.
Street.
Yeah.
Sure.
Man, and I felt like we were in high church or something over there.
Yeah.
These guys, and it was kind of, everybody was real kind of serious, and the other meetings were a little less, but we went to some down on the waterfront and stuff like that were.
Sure.
Yeah. So, but I got tired of, what happened was, because my sponsor would tell me, when you get a craving, I get a craving every now and then, and he says, just give me a call, and we'll say, come on over, we'll have a cup of coffee, we'll talk about it. He says, it'll start getting less and less, It's almost like with the Big Book and Dr. Bob thing. It was, and I didn't really quite understand, because part of it I was internalizing, and as a young person, I wanted to be seen as an adult and not some scared kid. I think there's a piece of maybe all of us that just doesn't want to be seen as a scared kid.
Yeah.
And where we experience some portion of our life is being that frightened individual.
Yeah.
And right. And so when the third or fourth time it happened, I thought, I'm not going to call that guy. I'm just showing weakness. And I didn't want to be perceived as weak.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I now know, in hindsight, is that I made a deal with the disease. It was like it wrapped a warm blanket around me and said, hang on, buddy, we're coming to get you. We got you. Don't worry about it. You don't need to call that sponsor. We got you. And I left from a meeting where I was talking to parents of students, teaching them drug education, and talking to the PTA, and left from that meeting and called this girl that I'd met, in a kind of random way the universe unfolded. I was buying a concert ticket at a place, and I ran into this girl I knew that was a cheerleader that I used to date. She was working at this place, and I could tell that she was high. And I kind of just logged it in my brain. I didn't really have a place to go back to where people were that I knew were using. And I saw her, and I thought, I'll remember that. And I went and told her this elaborate lie. Later, she told me, she says, I didn't really believe you, but I didn't care. You wanted to buy heroin. I was willing to get you some. I got a really complicated story that's not, but it was like, because I just thought she was going to, because I felt convicted.
So you leave the good side of town to go over to the bad side of town. You leave service to others to become service to yourself. That's quite a downward role, isn't it?
And what's curious is that I told myself, so because of what the book says, jails, institutions, or death. So I was to take some of that stuff like real literal. So I said, I'd been a night or two in jail, and I'd been in a mental institution. I've been up on the 14th floor of a place that was like where they were keeping me separated from drugs and myself. And so I thought, well, death's the only other thing. So I bought enough heroin to kill myself with. And then I went back to this apartment where I stayed with other people in the program. They were playing bridge in the living room. And I just walked by and said, man, I got the flu or something. I'm going to my room. And I went in there and never even tried to do enough to kill myself. I did just enough to see how good it was. And then I did a little bit more until it was all gone 2 or 3 days later. And I called my sponsor and confessed. And he says, I knew it the other day when you called and told me you were sick and you couldn't come to work. I could hear it in your voice. He says, are you done?
Oh, my.
And I said, yeah, I am. And he says, well, and they were so kind to me. Nobody shamed me, blamed me. They said, we'll take some of the weight off of you. We'll give you more time to go to more meetings for yourself. And my pride and ego could not take being the guy that only had 1 day. When somebody else that had 30 days, now I had to see and perceive as someone that had, that was doing better than me or whatever. And I viewed it that way, unfortunately.
So coming back after a relapse was an admission of failure as opposed to a cry for help.
And I stayed until I got another paycheck. Ego and pride, man, just huge. And I didn't know it then. I didn't identify it as that. I thought, man, I'm out of here. From that time, when I relapsed the next time, it was not a month. Within a month, I was sitting in jail going to prison. I mean, literally.
Tell me a little bit more about that, about the jail to prison experience.
Well, that time, my brother, who's now deceased from alcoholism, and I robbed a drugstore, and we got caught almost immediately. And we went to jail, and then we both ended up going to prison. And went down, did a couple of years, got out, and went down there resentful and mad. Never went to AA, never even tried to, there was some people from recovery that stayed in touch with me. And one of the guys you probably knew, Greg Loveridge. Yeah, so Greg, who's now deceased, liver disease, but he had 40-something years when he died. And Greg had always stayed in touch with me. He is one of the guys I had lived with back then. And so I'd get out and I'd go by to see what they're doing in recovery. And you always feel like an outsider if you're not in. And I got this idea that the world was against me or something. I had adopted a mentality of saying I was going to just I'm going to be this best other bad person or something. And I invested in that, unfortunately, for way too long.
We'll be right back. My friends, if you're enjoying AA recovery interviews, I invite you to check out my latest audiobook, Alcoholics Anonymous, the story of how more than 100 men have recovered from alcoholism. This is the word-for-word, cover-to-cover reading of the first edition of the Big Book, published in 1939. It's a relaxing yet meaningful and engaging way to listen to the Big Book anytime, any place. Have a free listen at Audible, iTunes, or Amazon. While you're there, search for my other audiobook, Lost Stories of the Big Book, 30 original stories from the first and or second editions missing from the third and fourth editions of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's also available from Amazon as a Kindle book or in paperback if you'd like to read along. You're going to love it. And we're back. You went to jail and then to prison for the robbing of the drugstore. How long were you in prison that time before you got out?
3.5 years. that time, first time.
So you get out of prison, you go right back to what you were doing, and even more so.
So I went to prison 3.5 years, got out. So my brother got out about a month later. We were out 3 months, got busted again. He got shot and didn't die. Another guy in the robbery did die. And we got convicted, went back to prison, stayed 6 years that time, and got out. Came right back out and did almost the exact same time. So it was 3 months, then 6 months, then 9 months. And it was each time I went right back to almost identical. It's like not much different. And in prison, I was just learning more stuff about nothing that was particularly productive. I did go to some college, but I wasn't going with any kind of a approach towards doing anything.
Right.
And then the last time after I'd stayed out 9 months, I got a life sentence and each time it was for robbery. So it was like robbery.
So by the time you're convicted the third time, that's where that sentence came from, that life sentence?
Right. That's correct.
How did you feel when that went down for you? I'm just curious. I've never known anybody who's been in prison for a life sentence before. That's why I was asking.
Yeah. So initially, all the air goes out of the balloon, but you have, by that time you're used to the way the system works, and you realize that's what you're facing. So you realize it's a possibility, and then you and so it's. I remember right before I thought I'd got away with a bunch of stuff that had I got caught, I would have already been back. And this friend of mine was going through a financial difficulty. As a guy I grew up with, and was like a brother to us. And his family was like my second family there in Bel Air. And he was going through some hard times, and I didn't know it. And then I heard him out. He'd gone out and his car wouldn't start, and I heard him, cussing and moaning. He came back in and was looking for a gun. He said he wanted to go sell it. And his wife, who I'd seen the gun and the bullets the night before, and when he was looking for it, I says, "Give him the gun." And she said, "No, he might kill himself." I think he's, and I thought, he's going to kill himself. And she says, "You don't know. You haven't been around, Tom." And I thought, well, give me the bullets and then give him the gun. If he's, he'll go sell the gun. He's going to sell the gun. He doesn't have to sell the bullets with it.
Right.
And so she gave him the gun, and then he went back out in the car, and I could hear him beating on the steering wheel, and crying. So I went out there and said, "What's up?" And he started telling me how he everything he was presenting to me up there was a fraud. He was in debt in 4 or 5 different kinds of ways and was stuck out.
Yeah.
And I told him, that nothing's worth that. I says, the worst that can happen to me is I get a life sentence for going doing a robbery, and which was, eventually what happened.
Wow.
But I would have and I don't want to make it sound like it's him, because I would have ended up. I wasn't on any path to doing something better. I was just kind of in a holding pattern.
So how old were you when you got the life sentence?
36, 37.
Okay, so 36, 37. And how long did you serve before you were paroled?
I did 20 calendar years to become eligible, and then I made my first eligibility for parole.
Huh. So you weren't sober yet when you went in for the life sentence. How did AA or recovery materialize for you in prison?
So when I got busted in Austin, and I'd been kind of, I don't want to say living there, but I was, but I was staying there, and I knew a bunch of people. A lot of people I knew from Houston, and particularly from Bel Air, their musicians had all moved up there, so I knew a bunch of people in the area. So I come into the jail, and there's a guy who I probably met, Kern, So Kern was the counselor for the drug program there. I did not know him then. Didn't even know, because he was in Austin. I didn't know he had been raised in Houston. And he was running this drug treatment program, and they had all these guys like Stevie Ray's band and all these other musicians that were coming into the jail there that were all sober. And I thought, sober looked kind of cool then with these guys, these rock and roll guys that have, more money than I thought was, anybody could ever, spend. They were up there doing volunteer work in the county jail, bringing meetings in there to the county jail in Travis County. And so I started going to meetings. Part of it was just something to do. Part of it was, but then I saw these guys and I thought they all seemed sincere and pretty solid people. But I wasn't done yet. But I got like a year sober, almost telling the truth, almost working the program. Almost.
It was part-time AA, right?
Well, it was, it was like, I was still thinking about escaping would be better than going to prison for life, and there's a lot of stuff I was still like, kind of thought was entertaining the idea of. And then when I got the life sentence, which I fairly well was certain I would get a bunch of time, if not that much. But something like that. I would still hold on to a handcuff key, with a possibility of, trying to, like go south if I could.
Sure.
When I got the life sentence, I remember it's just like all the wind went out of my sails. And the lawyer that represented me was a guy I grew up with. Again, he was right there. He was a surfer, rock and roll music guy that was from our part of town. And I had been sober a year, and he said, "What do you want me to bring you?" And I thought, well, just bring me some narcotics, and he did. He brought, he just brought him up there to the jail, and I got loaded for a couple of days, and I thought, well, I got to get straight. And I got straight trying to work on my appeal for a while, and I ended up, by the time I got back to prison, I went back to the same unit I'd been to a couple of times before because of a prior escape that I had on my record. I went to a unit called Ellis, where death row was. Right. And as soon as I walked in, guys were walking up to me in the hallway going, "Don't worry about anything. We got a fan for you. We got a radio." One guy walked up and handed me a marijuana cigarette.
Wow.
And a quick handshake right in front of I'm sitting outside the major's office waiting to get a cell assignment. And somebody walked up and says, "Here, man, it's good to have you back." Prison had become home. I was home. I got back to my spot, but I didn't use anything for a little while, and I went to they had AA meetings in the chapel, and I went down there, and then I realized that, there was a lot of, I could do something different in there, and it wasn't do something to get sober. I started smuggling drugs in and drinking, and we drank and smoked pretty much every day. So that was, I got arrested in 87, and I got to the actual facility probably in late 88, early 89. And then by the end of 92, I had, run the wheels off of it. We were being addicted in prison and drinking all the time. And, we just...
It's amazing.
And there was, Ann Richards was the governor, and they had started a recovery dormitory. And the recovery dormitory gave us an opportunity to have, kind of a peer support. Kind of like what an AA meeting gives you. So, and then we had AA, some really good people that are still active in Houston, Rito and Chuck and a bunch of those guys that are still do volunteer work.
Oh, yeah.
Were coming in and bringing meetings there to the facility.
This was the Ellis unit you're talking about?
Right. And so they were bringing meetings to the facility, and they came every week. And we were in a treatment program, where they actually, we went to stuff where we started processing things, and I started looking at the things that had been blockages from the past. And I got to the point where in there, I became like a different person. I started being able, I had credibility as an inmate, convict, whatever you want to call them.
Sure.
And so I had credibility. I built a world that I lived in, where I had the respect of people there because I'd come and gone so many times, and what I did in there and the way I lived as a inmate, though, not as a convict, And so then I started changing. Now, something happened, like the actual compulsion was removed. I did what I didn't believe would work. I got on my knees and prayed to a God I didn't necessarily believe in. I got a big book. I got a sponsor. I started working the steps. I started going to meetings. Started turning down things I used to say yes to. I quit stealing. I didn't have I got rid of any weapons I had. So I never, I've never used a weapon since then. Never had one and was thinking about using one. I've only been in 2 fist fights, and one was, both of them I made an amends immediately afterwards, and neither one of them was very long. It was a couple of, quick, like emotional punches,
So was that behavior that come out of one burning bush experience or one turning point or moment of clarity for you, or was that a gradual coming to the truth?
Once the compulsion was removed, so once again, I remember talking to my sponsor. There was like a point, like maybe 3 months in. I don't remember the exact date, but there was an event that was emotional enough that in the past I guaranteedly I would have at least been overwhelmed with wanting to use or drink if I hadn't have gone ahead and acted on it. I would have had that, and it didn't happen that way. And I remember saying that to him, and he said, we're going to bear down on your character defects. The amends was a piece of it, but it was that continuing, when we say that that we ask for God to remove our character defects, but everybody that's been sober a while knows that's not exactly how that works. It works that you ask God to remove them. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're all necessarily all gone.
Yeah, it's in the asking. Now, was this the man who was working with you? Was he your sponsor, and was he an inmate there with you?
That's right. Is it different of a duck as a guy? And I remember asking the counselor there, I said, well, who do I, what am I looking for in a sponsor? And he says, somebody that's got something that you want. And I wanted long-term sobriety. And this guy had come back to jail without relapsing. So he had like 12 years sober. He had some other behavior that he alleged he didn't do. But he was had been an officer, in Army Rangers. He was raised in some rural Oklahoma town. So he was like a small town guy. He wasn't a dope fiend guy. He wasn't a criminal or nothing. But I would see that he was active in the group. He was participated in the group. He was there all the time. He knew the book, and he didn't seem disingenuous. He was like he was maybe living it to me as best he could. He would be willing to be wrong and eat crow and stuff like that. And I thought, so.
That's pretty cool. Now, I just was wondering, as you were saying all that, how did you reconcile the hopefulness of getting sober and having the compulsion to use and drink removed? How did you reconcile that with the hopelessness of a life sentence in prison?
So I thought, well, at some point I accepted the fact that I might not ever get out of prison. I thought, well, I've created this world. But I didn't like the human being that I was. I didn't like living in the skin and doing things the way I'd been doing them. And so what the program gave me was an opportunity in there, and there were some other people that also gave me permission to be able to do something different. So I started looking at practicing the principles of Alcoholics Anonymous in all my affairs in prison.
Wow.
So I would start, there was a bunch of stuff that we did. For me, as time went on, in there, if somebody stole something, then what you would do is they usually would beat them up.
Right.
And so I had acquired a path of nonviolence. And so I thought, I don't endorse stealing from other people in my living area. And there was a thief, and they were trying to find out who it was and catch him and beat him off the tank. So I put a sign up that said, can we come together in nonviolence and pray for this individual, for a nonviolent outcome in this situation. And a bunch of guys signed their name that they would join me at a particular time of day to, pray about that particular outcome. And the stealing stopped for a few months. It wasn't forever, but the thing was it made a difference. And then I remember on 9999. The threat of Y2K was coming, and at that particular time, 9999 was going to be the first indication that the computer systems were going to fail because everything was going to be nines.
Yeah, I remember that.
Right? And so people that were very spiritual and all this other stuff were freaking out. Everybody thought, well, the system's going to fail and we won't be able to get our commissary from commissary. And it really affected me in a way strongly. And I thought, man, maybe we can do something about that. And so I got the idea that I could give away soup, the little ramen noodle soups that cost a quarter. But in prison, a 25-cent soup can be a meal if the food's really bad and you've got to eat something on your own. If you don't have that, then you're really hungry. It fills up the space. Yeah. And so I got a bunch of soups and found another fella that would give them away. And I made up a sign and I said, soups for free, and started giving away soup. And I did it. And my objective then was to start to go from 99.99 or closely thereafter until my sobriety date on January the 6th, and then see how that went. So I made a commitment to do it that 3 or 4 months. Yeah. And then I did it about 2 years every day. And initially people go, this won't work. You cannot give this in prison. They have inmates have their own little stores where they sell stuff for 50% interest. And they said, you can't do this. People are going to take advantage of you. I said, well, if they do, that's their karma. Wow. I'm going to give it away and we'll see. And so people would come, a couple of guys came and just got soups when they didn't need them to prove to me that people would take advantage of me. And I gave them the soups anyway. And then when they went to the commissary, they brought soups back in excess of what they had borrowed. Because they weren't borrowing them, I was giving them. They said, I don't know what you're doing. We're going to put some money into this deal because I don't know. We've never seen anybody do this before.
So it was a commitment to helping others that helped you keep your commitment to yourself of staying sober. Is that right? Is that a reasonable way to put it? Yeah. So obviously right now, I'm not talking to you in prison. So somewhere along the way, while you were sober, you got out of prison. Can you tell us just a little bit about that, and then what happened in Alcoholics Anonymous for you around that time?
So I became eligible in 2007, and so after 20 calendar years. And long story short, I made my first parole, which is unusual. I found out about it. It was curious. The day that my dad got killed, 50 years earlier, I got informed that I'd made parole. I was released.
That's amazing.
The Friday before Mother's Day in 2008.
Wow.
And when I came home, John Gordon, God bless his soul, who's not any longer with us, but had long-term sobriety.
Good man.
Yeah. He and Steve M., Russell L., and all came and brought a meeting to the house. For 3 or 4 days, I had a monitor. It wasn't 3 or 4 days that I had a monitor, but until I could get in and get some travel permits and stuff like that, they came and brought meetings to me. And they really didn't know me. They were friends of Greg's, and and Greg was living in Austin, Round Rock at that time, and so he called them, and they came and brought meetings to me, and of course now as you would know, I became friends with all of those guys.
Yeah, and you later on would be the guy who was doing that for others. Right. Yeah. I remember you saying something that stuck with me since then about the odds of you getting parole, how slim they were. And then you drew on what you had been doing in AA and credited that with being a big reason why that miracle happened.
Right. The percentages were 1 in 10. It was actually 11% chance based on their system. And the guy that interviewed me actually told me, he says, man, you've gone to college, you've got a degree now, you go to AA all the time, you do volunteer work, you're doing all this stuff, and he said, on paper you look good. He says, but your criminal history is terrible. So, despite what you're doing right now, and he says, look, you don't have any tattoos. You speak as if you're well educated.
Right.
So he said, normally, but he said, and he told me, he says, you won't make parole. And I said, I might not make parole, but according to your system, I have a 1 in 10 chance. And I says, that's one square on a shotgun pool, a football pool, and I've won with one square, and I haven't had a square on the pool for 20 years. So,
wow.
I'm going to take my little, what I got. And the truth was, I knew that if I didn't make parole, which I didn't actually expect to make parole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I could be there for the rest of my time. I had some peace of mind and serenity that said I can be there doing the work.
Wow.
I can be there doing the work. And there was work. There's always work. There's work to do there.
So you were in your mid 50s when you were released?
Right.
So, and I know the men you're talking about, and they're just, especially John. John was a very close friend of mine, and you and I both sat by his bedside when he was dying, and of liver disease, and he was just a beautiful man. I came to know you, I guess, shortly after you got out of prison. I never would have known from your demeanor or anything about it that you had been to prison until it came up, and then it was like, what? So there was something about you in the early days of seeing you over the Delta that made me think, wow, I found it hard to believe that you had been in prison because you were well-spoken and you were well-versed in the program of Alcoholics Anonymous.
I've kept studying,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm practicing. I think it's part of it's studying because I love the literature. And when they come out with the last book that they came up with, all Bill's the talks were phenomenally informative.
Yeah. Our great responsibility.
It's just like full of just great stuff.
Yeah, it was his talks at the various conventions starting in 1955, and for anybody who hasn't seen that book, it's very informative, and it kind of gives you a little bit different perspective, because he wrote a book about the business. He didn't write the book, but all of his speeches and everything are in that book that talked about the business end and the formation of the traditions and everything else and the difficulties they had in the early days. So, yeah, I would highly recommend that book as well. So you're out of prison, you're going to AA all the time, the years are passing by. You had been sober how long when you got out of prison? That would have been... 14 years?
Yeah, 14, 15.
Okay, so in the intervening years between release from prison and, let's say, very recently, were there times in your life that tried your serenity or tried your commitment to AA? And could you speak to maybe a few times when AA was there for you to help you through?
Oh, I could say when my mom died, when my brother died. So both my baby brothers have died from alcoholism. Both of them had been in the program to a degree, and had gone back out. And so that my mother, and people, man, the church was not only full of people that were close to my mother, but there were so many people that came from my home group, when they had the funeral, that it was an amazing, and they handled everything. The girls, the women came to me and says, just get out of the way, and they took over, preparing, for the stuff afterwards and everything. So it was an amazing experience. I think, John's the one that got me to go back into the recovery field. John was actually we went to eat. He already had his diagnosis with cancer, and he had told me, he says, "Have you ever thought about going back into the field?" And I said, "Nah, it's too much pain and suffering. get enough of that just doing volunteer work."
Yeah.
And he told me you ought to consider it.
Yeah.
And then he, and then what I've learned in the program, and I've used this all the time, is that, my first thoughts is often not right.
Right.
And what I did is I called my sponsor. So what I did is I knew that John believed. He said, "You'd be good at it. You ought to really give it some consideration." And then the fact that he had reiterated that before we left. He said it at the beginning, and then he didn't push it. He was intelligent enough not to push it. And then he just said, "You ought to make this phone call and see." And then I thought, well, who am I to say no? Because I don't know. And I was looking for something I was looking for something else to do right then.
Right.
And so I made a call, and I talked to my girlfriend, and everybody said, "I don't know why you're not doing it." And so I thought, well, they're not going to let me. The state of Texas, I'll prove to y'all are wrong. And then the state of Texas said yes. So anyway, I've been doing that for a decade or so now.
Boy, talk about coming full circle, Tom. That's really amazing. I've seen you go through the things with your mother and the tragedies of your brothers over that period of time. And what I know about you is that you are, even before you landed in the recovery work as employment, I've seen you. You are the hand that's been reaching out. You're the guy with the AA pledge or the responsibility. I've seen that over and over again over the years. And where did you learn that from, or is that just something kind of innate?
Well, it was how I was sponsored. I had a service work sponsor. I didn't know that people get sponsored sometimes and they aren't given us, that take on a service commitment. So just like with you and some of the other people that we know, and you'll see Larry that makes the coffee or something like that. You know what I mean? And it can be just as simple as the person that goes in and straightens up or puts the chairs out or whatever it is. That comes behind people without saying, "Hey, here, look at me."
Right.
So it's been where my home group is. They're, in normal times, non-COVID times,
right.
There's a lot of opportunities for service over there, and
new people coming in all the time.
Yeah, and sometimes it's the it's being there to welcome the new person, just have your handshake thing and getting to know people initially. I've developed over time. I don't have a problem walking up to somebody and introducing myself and just saying hello. Giving them my phone number, and try to feel like I've got a fair feel for if it seems like they're not open to that I can just let that go.
Yeah.
I don't. They don't have to do anything. But I want them to know that I can remember what it felt like to come in and sit on the back row and not want to be called on.
Right. And not want to be there, perhaps. Right.
Right.
Going back to your first exposure to AA. So you've lived this extraordinary life for quite a number of years now, almost 28 years sober coming up. When you meet somebody that's new or maybe questioning whether or not they feel like they really have a problem, whether they really want to be in AA, maybe the court has made them come a certain number of times. Given your experience and how vastly different as compared to most newcomers, a guy who was in prison for life and then he's out, now he's in the recovery, how do you bridge the gap between the experience that you have and the way that they see that experience? Do you find that that creates a greater reluctance to work with you or to talk with you, or are they more drawn to you? I don't know if I'm asking that question right.
So it's a good question, because I don't keep from. I'm willing to talk about having been to prison. I don't think it's a selling point. Right. You say, I've been to prison. If I spent 34 years incarcerated, and this is. So then everybody would say, well, you need to be in AA. So there's an energy that I like to talk in energy, but so there's an energy that I know is true. Yeah. I think it's a spiritual energy. It's a product of being plugged into Alcoholics Anonymous. Yeah. There's a line in there's a part in the 12 and 12, and one of the things that it says, that it's an individual adventure. They talk about meditation.
Sure.
And, and they'll say it's an individual adventure, each to be developed in his own way. One of the first fruits is emotional balance. And I said, why wouldn't you want that? Right. So, and I took to that. I had practiced a spiritual practice before, and I just fell away from it. So when I got back this time, I was so anxious when I first got sober. I understand how people feel. And for many new people I work with, unless you've been in enough meetings with me that I don't have a problem talking about it, but I don't have to talk about it all the time. And then for most people, you might as well be saying, well, I used to live in Africa.
Right,
or some country somebody's never lived in before.
Right, but they can't relate.
You say, I spent 10 years in China, and they think, oh, wow, I bet that was weird. And they just go right on to something that they're more familiar with.
Right on. But you have the kind of the rare qualifications to talk to the guy who's sitting there comparing his insides to everybody else's outsides, who's been to prison and may still be holding on to some of the things that would be barriers to being content in AA. You're the guy who can go talk to him with a level of understanding that surpasses a guy like me who doesn't have that particular experience.
But I'll say this, and for when we were inside, that the people that came in initially, the people I was drawn to, and this is just a kind of I think early recovery thing, no matter where you're located, is that you're drawn to something that looks similar to you.
Yeah.
They talk sort of the same, they sound sort of the same. But some of the people whose sobriety that really impressed me were people that were coming into prison because the people in prison knew, about getting into prison. They didn't want, so it was how do you stay out? And you stay out by learning to abide by the rules and regulations, not put alcohol and drugs in your body and stuff like that. There's some things that a guy like you doesn't, what you know well is what it took for you to not drink anymore.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Right. And people, my first sponsor was like I say, he was as different as night and day to any life I'd lived.
Yeah, I get that.
The sponsor that I got after him was the same way, and Jimmy S. But I love him.
Yeah, I do too. He's a good man, and obviously he's doing a good job with you based on what I know about you and the way I see you interact with other people around the club. This has been pretty amazing, and I think very inspiring to be able to talk to you like this and be able to share this as part of the AA Recovery Interviews podcast, that it may reach some other people out there. I want to ask you maybe just one other thing, and I've been asking all my guests this, and that is about the opportunity versus the difficulties that have arisen because of having to do meetings by Zoom. How you just feel about the whole format and what we have been elevated to or reduced to by the virus.
It's interesting. It's great because we reach more people all around the world.
Yeah.
And we can connect with people all around the world. So what we can only do at an international conference on a really brief way for a weekend, we can do every day now. So that's a blessing.
Yeah, that is.
Guaranteed. Comparably, there are enough small groups, and you and I attend some, where it's very intimate, not unlike the traditional home group feels. Right. Some of the other groups have been eaten up by a large number of people, and it feels like a great big giant meeting where you might be at an international conference.
Yeah.
But and for some of those are uncomfortable for me because they're different. My expectation is that this meeting I go to that has this name would be the meeting that I was used to from the past, and it's not that meeting anymore. Some of them have remained very close to what they are because I go to a number of Zoom meetings. For me, it's family. Alcoholics Anonymous is my family, and I've learned wherever I went to a meeting, anywhere in these United States, and I have not been to any outside the United States other than on Zoom. That I find my people. It's a benefit. Now it's also you miss the interpersonal communication.
Yeah, and the ability to be able to just grab people after the meeting. Or one of the things I know that I miss the most, although I'm really grateful for Zoom allowing us to continue to do what we need to do. But the one thing I do miss is the spontaneous laughter.
Right.
Because when somebody is speaking, it's almost impossible to be able to time it such that you can hear everybody laugh. But I haven't found it to be too bad of a substitute. I'm always grateful to see you on the Zoom meetings that you and I attend. And you and I have a tendency to attend the same kind of smaller, more intimate meetings, although I go to several that are very, very large as well. But I consider any group I go to, they say get a home group. I consider any group I go to my home group because I feel at home in AA. So everywhere I go, I'm at home. And I don't know if you feel that way, but I kind of sense you do, given the number of meetings you and I have frequented together over the years.
Yeah, I can find, I don't need just a particular, I have my people.
Yeah,
and I know you've got your people, but I've had other people, and and we've lost some through just like life, and they get you get old and you stay sober long enough, then sometimes things happen.
Yeah, I get that. Well, Tom, thank you for doing this. Was there anything else that you'd like to leave our listeners with as we wrap this up?
I got a little thing. Let's see how it goes across. It'll take just a minute. Let me think. Mm-hmm. If we can begin to have dreams for each other, we can build something new. It can be. If we are building something new, we can ask God to help us. And we will be busy while we are asking. I think God likes to help people who are already busy working for their dreams. Amen.
That is a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. And I'm going to need to play that back so I can memorize it. Tom D., you're a beautiful man, and I love you. You're a great AA brother, and I really appreciate you doing this today, just taking the time to let other people get to know you better. I wish you well, and I'll see you at a meeting in the next day or two.
Absolutely will.
Okay,
I
brother.
Love you. You know, Howard, I love you, right?
Yeah,
I love you. You're one of my guys, man.
Yeah, and I like being one of your guys, man. This is definitely a posse I want to be in. So God bless you, Tom, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you for the opportunity. God bless you, brother.
Well, my friends, that's a wrap for today's episode of AA Recovery Interviews. Thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed AA Recovery Interviews, will you please tell others how to listen to it? Think of it as a little AA service that spreads the word about this rich and meaningful listening experience. It's yet another helping hand we can all extend to alcoholics everywhere. Visit our website, aarecoveryinterviews.com, where you can listen to every episode of AA Recovery Interviews. And if you want to contact me directly with any comments or suggestions, simply email howard@aarecoveryinterviews.com. By the way, this podcast strictly adheres to AA's 12 traditions and all General Service Office guidelines for safeguarding anonymity online. I pay all production costs, and no one receives financial gain from the show. AA Recovery Interviews and my guests do not speak for or represent AA at large. This podcast is simply my way of giving back to AA that which has been so freely given to me. The next new episode of AA Recovery Interviews is on the way, so keep coming back. It'll be here soon.